My name is Janet, and I'm 32 years old. I live here in suburban Chicago, working as a marketing coordinator for a tech company. Tonight was supposed to be just another family gathering my father's 60th birthday party. But sometimes one moment changes everything forever. For as long as I can remember, I've been the family peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over arguments and made sure everyone got along. I thought tonight would be like any other celebration we'd had over the years. Boy, was I wrong. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you want to hear more real-life stories like this one. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how one sentence from my dad completely changed our family dynamic forever. Growing up as the middle child between my older brother Kenneth and younger sister Beverly was like being invisible in plain sight. Kenneth, now 35, became this hotshot lawyer who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. Beverly, 29, followed right behind him as the golden child when she became a doctor. Meanwhile, there was me quietly existing somewhere in between their achievements. I remember my high school graduation day. I was valedictorian, something I'd worked 4 years to achieve. But my parents missed the ceremony because they had to drive Kenneth to some important law school interview 3 states away. They said they'd make it up to me, but they never did. When Beverly got accepted to medical school, my 21st birthday party got canceled, so we could celebrate her instead. That's just how things worked in our family. Despite being overlooked, I managed to earn a full scholarship to our state university. I studied marketing, graduated with honors, and landed a good job right out of college. 5 years ago, I saved enough to buy my own little house on the north side of Chicago. It's not much, but it's mine. My parents attended the housewarming party, spent the whole time talking about Kenneth's latest case and Beverly's residency program. The pattern continued into adulthood. Every Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, and birthday party fell on my shoulders to organize. I coordinated with caterers, sent invitations, bought decorations, and cleaned up afterward. When my grandmother got sick 2 years ago, guess who took time off work to drive her to doctor appointments? When my uncle needed help moving last spring, who do you think spent her weekend hauling boxes? When Kenneth needed a loan for his new car, who handed over $3,000 that still hasn't been paid back? My mother Shirley always played the role of the sweet passive wife who avoided conflict at all costs. Whenever I tried to bring up feeling overlooked, she'd say things like, "That's just how your father is," or, "You know your siblings are busy with their careers." She'd pat my hand and change the subject, leaving me feeling like my concerns didn't matter. For Dad's 60th birthday, I took on the full responsibility once again. I spent 3 weeks planning every detail. I called the caterer, ordered the decorations, arranged the backyard setup, and coordinated with 50 different family members and friends. I worked overtime for 2 weeks straight to clear my schedule, then spent my entire weekend preparing for this party. I wanted it to be perfect for him. The irony wasn't lost on me that I put more effort into celebrating my father than he'd ever put into celebrating me. But I kept telling myself, that's what good daughters do. They put family first, even when family doesn't put them first in return. Saturday evening arrived with perfect weather for an outdoor celebration. I'd spent the entire day setting up tables, hanging string lights, and arranging flowers I'd bought with my own money. The backyard looked like something from a magazine spread. I'd prepared appetizers, coordinated with the caterer for the main course, and even made a special playlist of Dad's favorite songs from the 60s and 70s. Guests started arriving at 6 o'clock sharp. I greeted everyone at the gate, directed them to the bar area I'd set up, and made sure they had everything they needed. Meanwhile, Kenneth strolled in at 6:30 with a bottle of expensive wine, acting like he'd just conquered the world. "Sorry I'm late, everyone," he announced to the crowd. "Traffic was murder coming from downtown." He handed the wine bottle to Dad with a big smile. "Got you that vintage Bordeaux you mentioned wanting to try." Dad's face lit up like Kenneth had just given him the moon. This must have cost you a fortune." "You didn't have to do this." "Nothing's too good for the old man," Kenneth said, soaking up the attention from nearby relatives who were already praising his thoughtfulness. I watched this exchange while arranging napkins that had gotten blown around by the evening breeze. Kenneth had spent maybe 20 minutes picking up that wine bottle. I'd spent 3 weeks planning this entire event. Beverly arrived 15 minutes later, carrying a store-bought cake from the grocery store bakery. The same bakery I'd specifically told her I'd handle dessert for the party. "I know you said you had dessert covered," she said, barely looking at me, "but I figured Dad would want something special." She presented the generic chocolate cake to him, like she'd baked it herself. "Beverly, sweetheart, you're so thoughtful," Dad beamed. "Even with your busy schedule saving lives, you still make time for your old dad." I bit my tongue, remembering the 3-layer carrot cake I'd made from scratch the night before, complete with cream cheese frosting and candied walnuts. It was sitting in the kitchen, apparently not special enough now that Beverly had arrived with her last-minute grocery store purchase. The first hour of the party continued this way. I floated between groups, refilling drinks, clearing empty plates, and making sure everyone was comfortable. When Dad's colleague complimented the beautiful decorations, Dad accepted the praise without mentioning who'd actually hung every single light and arranged every centerpiece. "We're just lucky to have such a nice backyard for entertaining," he said, as if the space had decorated itself. I excused myself to check on the main course delivery. The caterer was running 20 minutes late, which meant I needed to keep guests happy with extra appetizers. I rushed to the kitchen, pulled backup snacks from the refrigerator, and arranged them on serving platters. By the time I returned to the party, Dad was in the middle of telling his favorite story about Kenneth's biggest legal victory to a captivated audience. When my Uncle Lloyd had too much to drink and knocked over a glass of red wine on the white tablecloth, I appeared with stain remover and a replacement cloth before anyone else even noticed. When the ice ran low, I made a quiet trip to the store. When the music got too loud for my grandmother's hearing aid, I adjusted the volume without being asked. I overheard Dad talking to his boss near the dessert table. "You're so lucky, Harold," his boss was saying. "It's clear someone in your family really loves organizing these kinds of events." "Oh yes," Dad replied. "I'm very fortunate that Janet loves to help out around here. Makes everything so much easier for Shirley and me." Help out. Like I was some enthusiastic volunteer instead of his daughter who'd sacrificed her entire weekend and a significant chunk of her paycheck to make this party happen. Beverly complained to Mom about the music selection I'd spent hours curating. "This oldies stuff is kind of boring, don't you think? Maybe something more upbeat?" Without consulting me, Dad immediately went to change the playlist to some generic party music that completely clashed with the sophisticated atmosphere I'd created. I watched him fiddle with my phone, undoing the careful thought I'd put into every song choice. Standing there watching my father erase my contributions so casually, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time, I truly saw myself the way I appeared to my family. I wasn't their daughter at these events. I was their unpaid event coordinator, their cleanup crew, their problem solver. I was useful, but I wasn't valued. At 8 o'clock, disaster struck. The catering company showed up with Mediterranean wraps instead of the barbecue dinner I'd ordered and confirmed 3 times. The delivery driver apologized, explaining they'd mixed up orders with another event across town. "Can you fix this?" he asked, looking at me like I was the event planner rather than a family member trying to enjoy her father's birthday. I glanced toward the backyard where 50 hungry guests were expecting dinner in 30 minutes. My family was laughing and socializing, completely unaware of the crisis brewing in the kitchen. I could have interrupted Dad's conversation with his business partners. I could have asked Kenneth to help solve the problem with his legal negotiation skills. I could have requested Beverly's assistance with her organizational abilities. Instead, I did what I always did. I handled it myself. I called 3 different restaurants before finding one that could deliver enough food for 50 people on short notice. It cost me an extra $200 of my own money, but I couldn't let Dad's party be ruined by cold wraps when people were expecting a proper meal. While I spent 45 minutes on the phone coordinating the replacement dinner, My family continued entertaining guests. Through the kitchen window, I watched Dad pose for photos with Kenneth and Beverly, their arms around each other, all smiles and laughter. No one noticed I wasn't in the pictures. No one came to check if I needed help with anything. When I finally returned to the party with news that dinner would be arriving shortly, I expected some acknowledgement of the crisis I'd just solved. Instead, I found Dad in animated conversation with his colleague Thomas about how smoothly everything was running. "Harold, you've really outdone yourself tonight," Thomas was saying. "This is one of the best parties I've been to all year." "Well, you know how it is," Dad replied with false modesty. "Shirley and I just wanted to make sure everyone had a good time. When you've got good teamwork, everything falls into place." Good teamwork. I'd just spent nearly an hour and $200 fixing a disaster that could have ruined his entire celebration, and he was taking credit for teamwork. The replacement dinner arrived at 9:15. I helped the delivery team set up the serving stations, arrange the food attractively, and made sure everything was properly heated. Guests complimented the delicious barbecue, and Dad accepted their praise like he'd personally grilled every piece of meat. During dinner, conversation turned to family updates. Dad proudly shared Kenneth's latest legal victory, complete with details about the high-profile client and the impressive settlement. He bragged about Beverly's recent promotion at the hospital, describing her as our little lifesaver to anyone who would listen. When someone asked about me, Dad's response was brief and dismissive. "Oh, Janet helps out around here. She's always been good at organizing things." Helps out. Like party planning was my hobby instead of my sacrifice. Like I was some family assistant rather than his daughter with her own career and accomplishments. I tried to join the conversation about upcoming family plans, but my voice got lost in the excitement about Kenneth's potential partnership track and Beverly's research project. Every time I started to speak, someone interrupted with another question about my siblings' careers. Finally, I recognized what I was seeing. In my family's eyes, I wasn't Janet, the marketing coordinator, who'd earned 3 promotions in 5 years. I wasn't Janet, the homeowner who'd built a life for herself. I wasn't even Janet, the daughter who deserved basic respect and recognition. I was Janet, the helper. Janet, the organizer. Janet, the problem solver, who appeared when needed and disappeared when not. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so busy trying to earn my place in this family that I'd never noticed I'd never actually been given one. At 9:45, Dad's business partner Roger approached our group with a wide grin and a nearly empty beer bottle. He'd been drinking steadily since his arrival and was now in that jovial stage where everything seemed hilarious to him. "Harold, my friend," Roger said, clapping my father on the back. "You've got quite the family operation going here. This is some serious teamwork." Dad chuckled, clearly enjoying the attention from his business associate. Several family members and guests had gathered around, drawn by Roger's loud, cheerful voice. "What can I say, Roger? We're blessed with good cooperation in this household." "No kidding." Roger gestured broadly toward the perfectly arranged party around us. "Someone really knows how to pull off an event. This is restaurant-quality organization." I felt a flutter of hope in my chest. Finally, someone was going to acknowledge the work I'd put into this celebration. Maybe Dad would take this opportunity to give me credit for the planning, the coordination, the problem-solving that had made this evening possible. Dad looked around at his perfectly executed party, taking in the beautiful decorations, the satisfied guests, the seamless flow of the evening. Then he turned back to Roger with that self-satisfied smile I'd seen 1,000 times before. "Well, Janet's always been the doormat in this family," he said with a casual laugh. "She just soaks up everyone's messes and keeps everything running smoothly." The words hit me like a slap across the face. Doormat. He'd called me a doormat in front of 50 people, including his business associates, our extended family, and our neighbors. He'd reduced 32 years of my life, all my efforts to be a good daughter, all my sacrifices for this family, to a joke about being something people walked on. The group around us erupted in uncomfortable laughter. Some people looked genuinely shocked, their smiles forced and awkward. Others seemed to find it genuinely amusing, nodding along like Dad had made some clever observation about family dynamics. "Dad," Kenneth said with nervous laughter, "that's a bit harsh, don't you think?" But Dad was on a roll now, emboldened by the attention and Roger's encouraging chuckles. "Oh, come on, she loves it. Janet's always been the one who takes care of everything. She thrives on being needed." Beverly shifted uncomfortably beside Mom, but neither of them said anything to defend me. Mom's face had gone pale, but she just stared down at her hands, avoiding eye contact with everyone. "She's like a doormat," Dad continued, warming to his theme. "Always there when you need her, soaking up whatever gets spilled, never complaining. Some people are just natural caretakers, you know." The blood rushing in my ears was so loud, I almost couldn't hear the continued laughter around me. 32 years of birthdays, forgotten achievements, overlooked contributions dismissed, and this was how he saw me. Not as his daughter who'd sacrificed for this family, but as an object. Something useful to have around the house. I looked around at the faces surrounding us. Some were laughing, some looked uncomfortable, but not one person was defending me. Not Kenneth, despite his nervous comment. Not Beverly, who was studying her shoes. Not Mom, who continued staring at her lap like she wished she could disappear. At that moment, something inside me snapped. Not broke, but snapped into place. Like a puzzle piece finally finding where it belonged. I'd spent 3 decades trying to earn love and respect from people who saw me as a convenience. I'd sacrificed my time, money, energy, and dignity for a family that thought of me as a household appliance. I walked calmly to the nearest table and picked up my champagne glass. The conversations around me continued, but I noticed a few people watching me curiously. I think they sensed something was about to happen, even if they couldn't predict what. I raised my glass high enough for everyone in the immediate area to see. The gesture caught people's attention, and gradually the chatter around us died down. More heads turned my way, sensing that someone was about to make a toast. "You know what, Dad?" I said, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet section of the party. "You're absolutely right. I have been the family doormat for 32 years. Dad's smile faltered slightly. He probably expected me to turn this into some self-deprecating joke that would get everyone laughing again and restore his position as the center of attention. But here's the thing about doormats. I continued, meeting his eyes directly. They're only useful when people keep walking on them. So if I'm just a doormat in this family, then don't ever ask me for help again." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see people's faces changing as they processed what I'd just said. This wasn't a joke or a lighthearted comeback. This was a declaration. "Janet," Dad said, his voice uncertain now, "I was just joking around. Don't be so sensitive." 32 years of your jokes, Dad." I kept my voice steady and clear. 32 years of organizing your parties while you take credit. 32 years of solving your problems while you call it helping out. 32 years of being invisible unless you need something. Mom finally looked up, her face frozen in shock. Kenneth and Beverly stood like statues, apparently unable to process this version of their quiet, accommodating sister. "Since I'm just here to soak up messes," I continued, "let me clean up one more thing. I planned every detail of this party. I coordinated with the caterers, I bought the decorations, I arranged the flowers, I made the playlist you changed. I solved the catering disaster that almost ruined your evening, and I paid for the replacement dinner out of my own pocket." Roger's face had sobered completely. He was no longer smiling, and I could see him beginning to understand that his casual comment had triggered something much bigger than a family spat. "I've organized every family gathering for the past decade. I've loaned money that never gets paid back. I've sacrificed my weekends, my vacation days, and my sanity to keep this family running smoothly. And tonight you called me a doormat in front of 50 people." Dad tried to interrupt. "Now, Janet, you're making too big a deal out of this. Everyone knows I appreciate—" "No." I cut him off, something I'd never done before in my life. "You don't get to dismiss this. You don't get to minimize this. And you don't get to tell me I'm being too sensitive when you've spent 3 decades treating me like hired help instead of your daughter. I looked around at the shocked faces surrounding us. Some guests were clearly trying to decide if they should leave. Others seemed frozen by the drama unfolding in front of them. So here's what's going to happen, I said, raising my glass higher. Since I'm just a doormat, I'm removing myself from underfoot. Don't call me to organize Christmas. Don't ask me to help with Mom's birthday. Don't expect me to coordinate the next family reunion, or solve the next crisis, or loan money for the next emergency. Dad's face had gone red. Whether from embarrassment or anger, I couldn't tell. Janet, you're being ridiculous. After everything this family has given you. Given me, I laughed, and it sounded strange even to my own ears. What exactly has this family given me, Dad? Besides the privilege of being taken for granted. The silence stretched on. No one seemed to know how to respond to this version of me. The version that spoke up instead of swallowing disappointment. The version that demanded respect instead of hoping for it. That's what I thought, I said finally. So congratulations, Dad. You're right. I was a doormat. But effective immediately, you'll need to find somewhere else to wipe your feet. The aftermath of my declaration was like watching a slow-motion car accident. For several long seconds, nobody moved or spoke. The only sounds were the distant music from the speakers and the uncomfortable shuffling of feet on the patio stones. Roger, clearly regretting his role in triggering this family explosion, mumbled something about needing to find the restroom and disappeared into the house. Several other guests followed his lead, suddenly discovering urgent needs to refresh their drinks or visit the bathroom. Within minutes, our audience had diplomatically scattered, leaving just our immediate family standing in an awkward circle. Kenneth was the first to break the silence, and his response was exactly what I'd expected from him. Janet, you're being completely dramatic about this. Dad was obviously joking around. Can't you take a little ribbing? His dismissive tone sparked fresh anger in my chest. Ribbing Kenneth, he called me a doormat in front of his business partners. He reduced everything I do for this family to a punchline about being walked on. But you're making this into such a big scene, Beverly chimed in, her voice carrying that patronizing tone she used with difficult patience. You're obviously stressed from work or something. Maybe you should take a step back and think about this rationally. I turned to face my younger sister, marveling at how quickly my family had shifted into damage control mode. Not one of them was addressing what Dad had said, or why it was wrong. Instead, they were focusing on my reaction, trying to paint me as the problem. Stressed from work, I repeated. Beverly, I took vacation days to plan this party. I worked overtime for 2 weeks to clear my schedule. I spent my weekend and my money making sure Dad had a perfect celebration. And when he calls me a doormat, you think I'm the one being irrational. Mom finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Maybe we should all just calm down and talk about this inside. People are starting to stare. Let them stare, Mom. I looked at her directly. This woman who'd spent 32 years watching her husband dismiss and diminish me without ever once standing up for her daughter. Maybe it's time people saw what this family really looks like. Dad's embarrassment was rapidly transforming into defensive anger. His face had progressed from red to purple, and I could see him struggling to regain control of the situation. That's enough, Janet. You're embarrassing yourself and this family. After everything I've provided for you, this is how you repay me. Provided for me? I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of his statement. Dad, I've been financially independent since college. I bought my own house, I pay my own bills, and I've loaned more money to this family than I've ever received from it. We gave you a roof over your head for 18 years, he shot back, grasping for moral high ground. We paid for your education, your food, your clothes. We raised you. You did the bare minimum required by law for any parent, I replied calmly. Congratulations on not committing child neglect, but providing basic necessities doesn't give you the right to treat me like unpaid household staff for the rest of my life. Kenneth tried another approach, stepping closer with his lawyer voice. Look, maybe Dad's joke was a little insensitive, but this reaction is completely disproportionate. We're family. We should be able to work through this without all the drama. We should be able to work through this. I stared at him in disbelief. Kenneth, when was the last time you organized a family event? When was the last time you coordinated care for a sick relative? When was the last time you sacrificed your weekend to solve someone else's problem? He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. We both knew the answer was never. That's what I thought, I continued. It's easy to dismiss my reaction when you've never had to deal with the treatment that caused it. Beverly tried to play peacemaker, which was rich considering she'd never played that role in our family before tonight. We all contribute to this family in different ways, Janet. Kenneth provides legal advice, I help with medical issues. When? I interrupted her. When have you provided medical help to this family? When Kenneth needed legal advice, you both show up to take credit and collect praise. But where are you when the actual work needs to be done? That's not fair, Beverly protested. We have demanding careers. And I don't... My voice was rising again. I work 45 hours a week in marketing. I've earned 3 promotions in 5 years. I manage a team of 12 people. But somehow my career never seems demanding enough to excuse me from family obligations. Dad made one final attempt to assert his authority. That's it. I don't have to listen to this disrespect in my own home. If you can't appreciate what this family means, maybe you should leave. Gladly, I said without hesitation. But understand that when I leave tonight, I'm not coming back to clean up your messes anymore. Mom spoke up again, her voice shaky now. Janet, sweetheart, maybe we should all take some time to cool off. We can talk about this tomorrow when everyone's calmer. I looked at my mother, this woman who'd spent my entire life enabling Dad's behavior and deflecting conflict instead of addressing it. Mom, there's nothing to cool off about. This isn't anger talking. This is clarity. But family is family, she said weakly, falling back on the tired phrase she'd used to excuse bad behavior my entire life. You're right, I agreed. Family is family, which means family should treat each other with respect and appreciation. When was the last time anyone in this family treated me like I mattered, as more than a convenient problem solver? The silence that followed answered my question more clearly than words could have. I walked over to the outdoor table where I'd left my purse and car keys. I'm going to collect my things from inside, and then I'm leaving. The cleanup supplies are under the kitchen sink. The leftover food needs to be refrigerated within the next hour. The rental company will pick up the tables and chairs on Monday morning. You can't just leave us to deal with all this, Kenneth protested. I turned back to face him with a smile that felt foreign on my face. Watch me. As I headed toward the house to gather my belongings, I heard Dad mutter something about ungrateful children and family loyalty. But for the first time in my life, his disapproval didn't make me want to apologize or try harder to please him. Instead, it made me realize how much lighter I felt without the weight of his expectations on my shoulders. The first week after Dad's party was like learning to breathe underwater. Everything felt strange and unfamiliar without the constant undercurrent of family obligations pulling at my consciousness. Monday morning arrived with no voicemail from Mom asking me to call the thank you note list from the party. For 32 years, I'd automatically handled post-event cleanup, sending thank you cards, returning borrowed items, following up with vendors. The silence felt weird at first, then increasingly liberating. By Wednesday, my phone started ringing. The first call came from Kenneth, though he didn't lead with an apology. Instead, he dove straight into his own crisis. Janet, I need your help with something, he said without preamble, as if Saturday night had never happened. My law firm is hosting a client appreciation event next month, and I'm supposed to coordinate the whole thing. You're so good at this party planning stuff. Could you... I interrupted him mid-sentence. No. What do you mean, no, I just need you to make a few phone calls, maybe coordinate with some vendors? Kenneth, what part of Saturday night was unclear to you? I meant what I said. Find someone else to help with your event. There was a long pause. Come on, Janet. Don't be petty about this. Dad was just joking around and you totally overreacted. This is business. Exactly, I said. It's your business. Handle it yourself. He tried arguing for another 10 minutes, alternating between guilt trips about family loyalty and dismissive comments about my sensitivity. When he realized I wasn't going to change my mind, he hung up frustrated and probably more than a little panicked about organizing an event for his law firm's biggest clients. Friday brought a call from Beverly, and her approach was slightly more sophisticated. She led with fake concern about my emotional state before transitioning into her request. "I've been worried about you since Saturday," she said in her best bedside manner voice. "You seemed really upset. Are you dealing with stress at work? Maybe you should talk to someone." "I'm dealing with stress from family," I corrected, "but that's being resolved." "Well, actually, I'm calling because I could really use your help this weekend. My babysitter canceled, and I have to work a double shift at the hospital. Could you watch Emma and Jake? You're so good with kids and they love their Aunt Janet." It was masterfully done. She'd packaged her request as a compliment, added the emotional manipulation of children who loved me, and framed it as helping with her important medical career. 6 months ago, I would have rearranged my entire weekend without question. "No, Beverly. Find alternative childcare." "But Janet, these are emergency shifts. People's lives are at stake. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." "Your childcare emergency isn't my responsibility. You're a successful doctor with a good income. Hire a professional babysitter." "I can't find anyone on such short notice, and the kids would be so disappointed." "Then you should have thought about backup childcare before committing to extra shifts," I said calmly. "I have plans this weekend." I didn't actually have plans beyond doing my laundry and catching up on Netflix, but that wasn't the point. My time was valuable, whether I spent it productively or relaxing, and I was done pretending otherwise. Beverly's friendly facade cracked slightly. "This is really unlike you, Janet. You've always been so willing to help family." "You're right. It is unlike me. I'm working on that." After she hung up, probably to call an expensive last-minute babysitting service, I realized something interesting was happening. For the first time in years, I had 2 full days stretching ahead of me with no family obligations, no events to plan, no problems to solve for other people. I'd forgotten what that felt like. Saturday morning, I woke up naturally instead of to an alarm set for early morning family duty. I made coffee and actually sat down to drink it while reading a book instead of gulping it down while rushing to help someone with something. I went to the farmer's market and bought vegetables just for myself, not for a family gathering. I spent the afternoon organizing my own closet instead of organizing someone else's event. It was revolutionary. Sunday brought the most interesting call of all. Mom phoned around noon, and her voice carried a tone I'd never heard before. Not the usual deflecting cheerfulness, but something quieter and more uncertain. "Janet, honey, could you come over for dinner, just you and me? Your father's playing golf with Roger, and I thought maybe we could talk." Part of me wanted to refuse automatically to maintain the boundaries I'd established. But something in Mom's voice made me pause. She sounded genuinely uncertain, maybe even a little lost. "What did you want to talk about?" I asked carefully. "About Saturday night. About what your father said, and about what you said." That was more acknowledgement of the actual issues than I'd gotten from Kenneth or Beverly combined. "I'll come for dinner," I said. "But Mom, if this turns into an attempt to guilt me into apologizing or going back to the way things were, I'm leaving." "I understand," she said quietly. "I just think we need to talk." When I arrived at my parents' house that evening, it felt strange walking through the front door instead of rushing around to the backyard to set up for some event. Mom had made pot roast my favorite meal growing up, but I tried not to read too much into the gesture. We ate mostly in silence at first, the absence of Dad's dominating voice making the dining room feel larger and quieter than usual. Finally, Mom set down her fork and looked directly at me. "I never stood up for you," she said simply. "All those years I watched your father dismiss you and overlook you, and I never said anything. I told myself I was keeping the peace, but I wasn't. I was just taking the easy way out. I nearly choked on my water. In 32 years, I'd never heard my mother acknowledge Dad's treatment of me, let alone admit her own role in enabling it. "Why didn't you?" I asked. Mom was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. "Because it was easier to let you absorb his criticism than to deal with his anger myself. Because I was raised to believe that avoiding conflict was more important than standing up for what's right. Because I convinced myself that you were strong enough to handle it." Her honesty was more painful than I'd expected. Part of me had always hoped that Mom simply didn't see what was happening, that she was oblivious rather than complicit. "I wasn't strong enough to handle it, Mom. I was just good at hiding how much it hurt." "I know that now," she said. "Watching you walk away Saturday night, seeing the look on your face when your father called you that name, I realized what I'd been letting happen all these years." We talked for 2 more hours. Really talked perhaps for the first time in my adult life. Mom didn't try to excuse Dad's behavior or convince me to forgive and forget. Instead, she listened as I explained how invisible and unvalued I'd felt for most of my life. When I finally left that evening, nothing was completely resolved, but something had shifted between us. It wasn't a return to the old relationship, but it might be the beginning of a new one built on honesty instead of avoidance. The second week brought evidence that my absence was having practical consequences beyond my siblings' inconvenience. Dad's thank you notes never got sent, which meant several family friends called to ask if he'd received their gifts. Kenneth's law firm event was shaping up to be a disaster because he had no idea how to coordinate vendors or manage logistics. Beverly ended up paying nearly $300 for emergency weekend childcare. But more importantly, I was beginning to remember who I was beyond the role of family problem solver. I started saying yes to social invitations I'd been declining for years because of family obligations. I reconnected with college friends I'd lost touch with. I even went on a date with David, a man from my gym who'd been asking me out for months. For the first time in my adult life, I was living my own life instead of managing everyone else's. 6 months later, my life looked completely different. The most visible change was my career. Without the constant drain of family obligations, I had energy to focus on work in a way I'd never been able to before. I started volunteering for high-profile projects, staying late to perfect presentations, and networking with colleagues in other departments. In March, I landed the biggest client my marketing team had ever signed, a tech startup that needed a complete brand overhaul. The project required creativity, strategic thinking, and project management skills I'd been developing for years, but never had the chance to fully demonstrate. The campaign we created exceeded the client's expectations and generated buzz throughout our industry. When the promotion to marketing director came through in April, I realized that all those years of coordinating family events had actually taught me valuable skills. The difference was that now I was using those skills for my own benefit instead of everyone else's. My personal life flourished too. David and I had been dating steadily since January, and he was unlike anyone I'd ever been with before. He appreciated my organizational skills without taking advantage of them. When I planned our weekend trips, he insisted on splitting both the work and the expenses. When I cooked dinner, he cleaned the kitchen. When I had a stressful day, he listened without expecting me to solve his problems in return. "You know what I love about you," he said one evening as we were planning a vacation to Colorado. "You're incredibly capable, but you don't use that capability to control everything. You plan things because you enjoy it, not because you feel obligated to." It was the first time anyone had ever recognized the difference between choosing to help and being expected to serve. I'd also started therapy with Dr. Patricia Reeves, a woman specializing in family dynamics and boundary setting. The sessions helped me understand that my role as the family caretaker hadn't developed accidentally. It was the result of a complex system where everyone benefited from my willingness to sacrifice my own needs. "Families are systems," Dr. Reeves explained during one session. "When one person changes their role dramatically, It forces everyone else to adapt. That's why your family is struggling so much with your new boundaries. They're having to figure out how to function without your constant management. The evidence of this was everywhere. Kenneth's law firm event had been such a disaster that he'd been passed over for partnership consideration. Beverly had struggled to balance her work schedule without me as free backup childcare, leading to conflicts with her husband about sharing domestic responsibilities. Dad had gained 15 pounds because Mom, without my help, couldn't manage both her job and elaborate meal planning. But the most significant change was in Mom. Our Sunday dinners had become a regular thing, but they were different now. Instead of talking around problems, we addressed them directly. Instead of focusing on what everyone else needed, we talked about what we wanted. "I've started telling your father when I disagree with him," she confided one evening. "It's terrifying, but also kind of liberating." "How's he handling that?" "Not well," she admitted with a small smile. "But that's his problem to solve, not mine." The family had made several attempts at reconciliation, but none acknowledged the real issues. Kenneth sent a Christmas card with a note about putting the past behind us. Beverly left voicemails about missing me at family gatherings. Dad's approaches were more aggressive, alternating between guilt trips about family loyalty and threats about inheritance. I ignored them all. In May, I received a call that changed everything. Dad had been rushed to the hospital with chest pains. The tests revealed a minor heart attack, nothing life-threatening but serious enough to require a few days of observation. Kenneth called to inform me, and his tone carried the expectation that this medical emergency would override all my boundary setting. "You need to come to the hospital immediately. Family should be together during times like this." "Is he going to be okay?" I asked. "Yes, the doctors say he'll make a full recovery, but—" "Janet, this is Dad we're talking about. You can't let some argument keep you away when he's in the hospital." "It wasn't an argument, Kenneth. And if he's going to be fine, then you and Beverly can handle the hospital visits." "But he's asking for you." "Then he should have thought about that before calling me a doormat in front of 50 people. I sent flowers to Dad's hospital room with a card, wishing him a speedy recovery, but I didn't visit. I didn't drop everything to rush to his bedside or coordinate care schedules for the family. I didn't organize meal trains or manage communications with extended relatives. Instead, I trusted that a successful lawyer, a doctor, and a woman who'd managed a household for 40 years could figure out how to handle a minor medical crisis without my intervention. They did, though apparently not without considerable stress and conflict about who should do what. The experience taught me something important about the difference between caring about someone and being responsible for their life. I could hope for Dad's recovery without sacrificing my own well-being to manage his crisis. I could love my family without allowing them to exploit that love. Summer brought the most meaningful change of all. Mom called in June to tell me about a decision she'd made. "I'm going back to school," she announced. "I've enrolled in a program to become a certified financial planner." I was shocked. Mom had worked part-time as a bank teller for years, but I'd never heard her express interest in advancing her career. "What brought this on?" "Watching you build your own life," she said simply. "I realized I've spent 40 years defining myself through other people's needs. Your father's career, you kids' activities, everyone else's problems. I want to find out who I am when I'm not just reacting to what everyone else needs." It was the most inspiring thing I'd ever heard her say. By late summer, I'd created something I'd never had before: a chosen family. David had become a real partner, someone who enhanced my life without demanding that I manage his. I'd deepened friendships with colleagues who appreciated my skills without taking them for granted. I joined a hiking group where I was valued for my enthusiasm and organizational abilities, but where those contributions were recognized and reciprocated. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who saw me as Janet, the whole person, not Janet, the useful helper. The 1-year anniversary of Dad's birthday party arrived on a crisp October evening. I was at home cooking dinner for David and 2 friends from work when my phone rang. Mom's name appeared on the screen. Hi, sweetheart, she said, and I could hear something different in her voice. Stronger, more confident than I remembered from our early conversations. How are you doing, Mom? I'm good. Really good, actually. I wanted to call because today marks a year since everything changed for our family. It does. I agreed. How are you feeling about that? Grateful, she said without hesitation. I know that probably sounds strange considering how painful this year has been for everyone, but I'm grateful that you found the courage to speak up. It forced all of us to look at ourselves honestly. I set down the wooden spoon I'd been stirring pasta with and gave Mom my full attention. Tell me about that. Your father and I have been in counseling since July, she said. Individual sessions and couples therapy. It's been difficult but necessary. He's finally starting to understand how dismissive and controlling he's been, not just with you, but with all of us. This was news to me. Dad in therapy was something I'd never imagined possible. How's that going? Slowly, Mom admitted. 40 years of behavior patterns don't change overnight. But he's trying, Janet. Really trying. He's asked me to call you tonight because he wants to see if you'd be willing to meet with him. I felt my stomach tighten automatically, the old anxiety response to family demands. But then I reminded myself that I had choices now. I could say no without explanation. I could set conditions. I could protect myself while deciding what, if anything, I owed this relationship. What would that meeting look like, I asked. He wants to apologize. Really apologize. Not just say he's sorry you were upset. He wants to acknowledge what he did wrong and ask if there's any possibility of rebuilding a relationship with you. Has he actually changed, Mom, or is he just afraid of losing control completely? It was a hard question, but Mom had become capable of answering hard questions over the past year. Both probably, she said honestly. I think the health scare scared him more than he admitted. But also I think losing you made him realize what his behavior was costing our family. Kenneth barely speaks to him anymore because he's angry about how the family fell apart. Beverly's been so stressed trying to manage everything you used to handle that she's been snapping at everyone. And I'm not the same person I was a year ago, Janet. I won't go back to enabling his behavior or staying quiet when he's wrong. If he wants a relationship with me, it has to be based on mutual respect. Same goes for his relationship with you. I thought about it for several minutes while Mom waited patiently. A year ago, I would have said yes, immediately desperate for any sign that my father might finally value me. Now I had the luxury of considering what I actually wanted instead of what was expected of me. I'll meet with him, I said finally, but in a neutral location with clear boundaries. This isn't about resuming the old relationship or pretending the past didn't happen. This is about seeing if he's capable of a new kind of relationship based on respect. I understand. And Janet, whatever you decide after meeting with him, I'll support your choice. You don't owe him forgiveness, just because he's ready to ask for it. 2 weeks later, I sat across from Dad in a coffee shop downtown, studying the man who'd shaped so much of my early life. He looked older than I remembered, grayer, and somehow smaller. The confidence that had always defined him seemed diminished. Thank you for agreeing to see me, he began, and his voice carried none of the commanding tone I was used to. I know I don't deserve your time after what I've put you through. It was a good start, but I'd learned not to be impressed by words alone. Tell me what you think you put me through, I said. He took a deep breath. I treated you like you existed to serve this family instead of being a valued member of it. I took credit for your work, dismissed your feelings, and reduced your contributions to jokes. I called you a doormat in front of 50 people because I'd gotten so comfortable seeing you that way that I forgot you were my daughter. I was surprised by the specificity of his acknowledgement. This wasn't a vague apology about hurt feelings. This was recognition of actual behavior. Why? I asked. Why was it so easy to treat me that way? Dad was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee cup. Because you let me, he said finally. And because it was convenient. You were so competent and so willing to help that I stopped thinking about the cost to you. I stopped seeing you as a person with your own needs and started seeing you as a resource. A doormat. Yes. He met my eyes directly, and I'm deeply ashamed of that. We talked for 2 hours. Dad didn't make excuses or blame his upbringing or try to minimize the impact of his behavior. He listened when I explained how invisible and worthless his treatment had made me feel. He acknowledged that my contributions to the family had been substantial and undervalued. Most importantly, he didn't ask me to forgive him or return to the family fold. Instead, he asked what it would take to build a relationship based on mutual respect. I'd need to see consistent change over time, I told him. I'd need you to acknowledge my value in front of other people the way you've always done for Kenneth and Beverly. I'd need you to ask for my help instead of expecting it, and to accept no as an answer when I'm not available. And if I can do those things, then maybe we can have a relationship. Not the old one, but something new, something better. Dad nodded slowly. I'd like that chance if you're willing to give it to me. I looked at this man who'd caused me so much pain and frustration, but who was also trying to change at 70 years old. Recovery wasn't guaranteed, and I wouldn't tolerate any backsliding into old patterns. But people could change, and maybe relationships could too. We'll see, I said. But Dad, understand that my life doesn't revolve around this family anymore. I have my own priorities, my own relationships, my own goals. Any relationship we build has to fit into the life I've created for myself. I understand, he said. And Janet, for what it's worth, I'm proud of the life you've built. I should have said that years ago. Walking back to my car after that conversation, I realized something profound had shifted. I no longer needed Dad's approval or recognition to feel valuable. I had that now from people who'd never taken me for granted. But having it meant I could choose to rebuild this relationship from a position of strength rather than desperation. I could love my family without sacrificing myself to them. That evening I called Mom to tell her about the meeting. How do you feel about it? She asked. Cautiously optimistic, I said, and grateful. For what? For learning that standing up for yourself doesn't have to mean cutting people out forever. Sometimes it means teaching them how to treat you better. And if they can't learn, then you have a clear conscience knowing you gave them the chance. 6 months later, Dad and I had built something that resembled a functional father-daughter relationship. He called to ask about my life instead of just updating me on family news. When I organized David's surprise birthday party, Dad complimented my planning skills and asked thoughtful questions about how I'd coordinated everything. When Kenneth needed help with another work event, Dad suggested he hire a professional planner and pay them appropriately instead of expecting family labor. It wasn't perfect, and probably never would be. But it was honest, and it was built on respect rather than obligation. The most important lesson I learned wasn't about family dynamics or boundary setting, though those were crucial. It was about the difference between being needed and being valued. For 32 years, I'd confused the two, thinking that being indispensable meant I was loved. Now I understood that real love doesn't require you to disappear into someone else's needs. Real love sees you, appreciates you, and treats you like you matter, not just like you're useful. The doormat was gone, and in its place stood a woman who knew her own worth. Some people walked around me now instead of on me, and that was perfectly fine. The people who mattered had learned to walk beside me instead, and that made all the difference in the world. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for yourself? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about finding your voice and setting boundaries. Share this with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to demand the respect you deserve. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that you're never just a doormat unless you choose to be one. Until next time, Keep standing up for yourselves and keep building relationships that celebrate who you are, not just what you can do for others.